Trey lay bleeding at the bottom of a pit, leg shattered, jungle closing in, when a massive gorilla appeared above him. Not to attack, but to guard him. For 2 days, she never left his side, but what happened next will shock even those who thought they'd seen everything. But first, let's go back to the beginning. The air was dense with rot and wet earth, and the metallic scent of blood quickly overpowered the mildew. Trey's breath came in ragged bursts, every inhale a struggle against the sharp pain that flared through his leg. He gritted his teeth, forcing himself not to scream again. It would draw attention, but from what? Rescue? Or scavengers? The pit was deeper than it looked. Over 2 meters at least, its bottom littered with broken bamboo spikes. The crude spears had failed to pierce his torso, but one had driven clean through his calf, and another had gashed his hip. The agony was incandescent, white-hot and unrelenting, but worse than the pain was the realization no one knew where he was. Chuck was supposed to be on patrol this morning, but Trey doubted he'd follow protocol. The man barely checked the map before heading out. If Trey was lucky, he'd be missed by noon. If not, he could die here, alone, buried beneath canopy and shadow. He fumbled for his radio, fingers slick with blood and mud. Cracked plastic, useless static. The fall must have shattered the comms unit. He slammed it against the pit wall in frustration, a dull, impotent gesture, and immediately regretted the wasted energy. Every movement sent tremors of pain through his shattered leg, each throb threatening to black out his vision. A rustle overhead broke the silence. Trey froze, heart hammering. Leaves shifted, and then eyes. Familiar, intelligent, impossibly gentle. Keela. The silver-backed female loomed at the edge of the pit, nostrils flaring as she sniffed the air, her great head tilting in confusion. She let out a low woof, knuckles dragging softly over the damp earth. Her presence stirred something primal in Trey. Not hope, not yet, but a flicker of recognition that he wasn't entirely lost. "Keela," he rasped, voice thin and shredded. She blinked slowly, her breath fogging in the dawn light. For 10 years, she had followed his voice. For 10 years, he had kept her safe. Now, he was the one who needed saving. She crouched low, inspecting the edge of the pit. Her muscles rippled beneath thick fur, a coiled question in her posture. Her fingers brushed the soil, probing, thinking. Gorillas didn't rescue humans. That wasn't how the world worked. But Keela wasn't just a gorilla. She was family. Trey stared through a haze of pain and heat, blinking against the sting of sweat, and blood running into his eyes. The jungle's humidity had turned suffocating, curling around his broken body like a wet cloth. His vision blurred, sharpened, then blurred again. But Keela remained constant, a dark silhouette outlined by the soft flicker of sunlight piercing the canopy. She sat unnaturally still for an animal her size, her massive frame hunched forward, hands resting lightly on her knees. Occasionally her eyes darted to the surrounding trees, ears twitching at the distant calls of birds or monkeys, but always she returned her gaze to him, unblinking, searching. Trey tried to focus. He had trained for emergencies, snake bites, dehydration, even gunshot wounds, but none of that training had prepared him for this. Lying broken in a poacher's forgotten trap, bleeding out while a gorilla watched over him like a sentinel carved from stone. A sharp jolt of pain racked his body as he shifted his weight, and a strangled groan slipped through his clenched teeth. Keela responded instantly. She rumbled low in her throat, a soothing maternal frequency Trey recognized from the early days when she was just a baby and he had rocked her to sleep in the ranger station nursery. That sound, low and warm and rhythmic, had calmed her then. Now it calmed him. She leaned forward again. In her hand she held more leaves, large, waxy ones plucked from a nearby banana tree. She stretched her arm into the pit, extending it as far as it would go, her fingers opening like petals. She didn't toss the leaves. She placed them. Trey's breath caught. The leaves were carefully arranged around his leg, almost surgically precise. She avoided the jagged wound, tucking them against the gash like she was trying to insulate it. Her other hand followed, pressing another layer against his thigh. It wasn't instinct. This wasn't mimicry. This was intentional. Keela, the orphaned infant who once clung to him with desperate, frightened hands, was now acting as nursemaid, caretaker, maybe even rescuer. The roles had reversed, and the look in her eyes wasn't curiosity or confusion anymore. It was will. Whatever intelligence glimmered behind her amber gaze had stepped forward, taken shape, and declared something undeniable. I see you. I know you're hurt, and I won't leave. He felt tears on his cheeks, hot and unbidden. Not from pain, not from fear, but from the terrible, humbling grace of being witnessed, truly witnessed, by another being who had no words, no training, and no obligation. Just love. The jungle swallowed Chuck's retreating footsteps, his flashlight beam bouncing wildly between vines and tree trunks until it vanished altogether. Silence rushed in behind him, thick and crushing, except for Keela's ragged breaths and the distant predatory calls of the night. Trey lay in the pit, every nerve pulsing with heat. Fever made the shadows crawl. The vines above shimmered like water. But one thing cut through the fog, the image of Keela, still upright, still fierce, still refusing to let anyone near him. Her chest rose and fell rapidly, the fur along her shoulders bristling. Though she'd made no move to chase Chuck, every line of her body was still coiled with threat. She turned her head slowly, scanning the darkness beyond the clearing, ears pivoting at the slightest crunch of leaves or distant chirp. Then, gradually, she settled back down beside the pit, eyes never leaving the tree line. She didn't look at Trey. She didn't need to. Her presence said enough. Trey tried to piece together what had just happened. The pain in his leg was a dull throb now, smothered by the hotter, heavier burn of infection. He could barely think straight, but the dread in Chuck's voice lingered like a toxin. This complicates things. The way he'd looked at Keela, not with awe or concern, but calculation, like she was leverage, or worse, evidence. Trey knew that look. He'd seen it in poachers, in traffickers, in government officials trying to keep their reputations clean. It was the look of someone who didn't see a living, breathing being, but a threat to their version of the truth. Keela hadn't just scared Chuck, she'd revealed him. And now Trey wasn't sure which predator he feared more. The ones in the trees, or the ones who walked on two legs with radios and excuses and no one to answer to. A loud rustle in the underbrush jerked his attention left. Keela stood again, tense and alert, shielding the pit with her body. Trey heard it too. Movement, slow and deliberate. Something was out there, not Chuck. This was heavier. No voice, no flashlight, just the methodical crunch of something testing the edges of the clearing. Keela growled low. Trey felt his heart pound against his ribs like a trapped animal. Whatever was coming, Keela would stand her ground. But how long could she hold the line? And how much longer could he survive? The air still smelled of mud and blood when they pulled Trey from the earth. His skin was gray from shock, lips cracked and trembling as he clung to the rope with what little strength he had left. The world above felt too bright, too vast after so long in the damp silence of the pit. Vultures had circled overhead earlier that morning, their shadows sliding across his chest like premonitions. He'd half welcomed them, but Keela had kept them at bay. Every hiss, every hoot, every rustle, she'd answered with guttural defiance, daring anything to come closer. The patrol had arrived with rifles, machetes, and unsure eyes. Their radios crackled with rapid Swahili, voices rising in confusion and awe as they beheld her. A lone gorilla, her broad back to the trees, planted like a stone wall between the jungle and Trey's broken body. One ranger raised his rifle on instinct. Another swore under his breath. "Don't," the lead ranger whispered, eyes wide. Keela didn't move. She watched them, not with the wild distrust of a cornered animal, but with something older, something human. Suspicion laced with grief, a question they couldn't answer. "Will you hurt him?" Only when they began lowering the rescue line. Did she finally step back? Not far, just enough. Her breath fogged in the morning chill. Rain still dripped from her fur in thick rivulets, matting her chest, streaking the earth beneath her with dark mud. She watched as Trey was lifted like a broken relic from a forgotten grave. His lips barely moved, but she saw the twitch of his hand, that soft rasp of gratitude. Keela turned without sound, without ceremony. She vanished into the trees like she had emerged from them, part shadow, part myth. The rangers said nothing for a long while, not even as they carried Trey down the mountain. It wasn't just the rescue that left them shaken. It was what they'd witnessed, a story no textbook could contain, a bond no documentary could stage, something primal, sacred, beyond words. Weeks later, after bones mended and fevers broke, Trey returned to the sanctuary trailhead. He stood beneath the newly installed plaque, bronze and weather-worn, bearing her likeness, and read the line beneath it again. She didn't speak. She didn't run. She just stayed. He smiled, not because it captured everything, but because it came close. And in the silence that followed, Trey swore he heard the soft rumble of her breath in the trees behind him, watching, still.